Good evening. My name is Karen Schubert. I'm the director of Lit Youngstown, and we celebrate these four Jewish writers in three states and uplift their voices. This reading is sponsored by Karen O'Malia and Philip Zotterer in honor of Rabbi Courtney Berman, Shara Wilczek, and Sarah, and I'm sorry, Sarah Wilczek and Jenny Lloyd, by Sharon Stringer and Ron Shackley, and by Congregation Ohev Beth Shalom. And we thank them for their support. Thank you to Elizabeth's Bookshop for setting up books by these authors on bookshop.org. And I'm so grateful to these incredible writers for spending time with us and for sharing their finely wrought work. I am in Youngstown, Ohio, a few hours from each of tonight's readers, and it is a magnificent evening in week something like 11 in the semester. So my extra thanks to them for taking this time, and thank you to all of those who are joining us. I will introduce tonight's readers in alphabetical order, and then we'll have a brief conversation after the readings. Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach is the author of 40 Weeks, published by YesYes Books. The Many Names for Mother, selected by Ellen Bass as the winner of the 2018 Stan and Tom Wick Poetry Prize and finalist for the Jewish Book Award. Her second collection, Don't Touch the Bones, published by Lost Horse Press, won the 2019 Idaho Poetry Prize. You can find her poems in Poetry, American Poetry Review, and The Nation, among others. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you so much. What a delight and a gift to be here with these marvelous writers at a time when community feels so healing and generative. So I thought that I would start with a brand new poem. How does everybody feel about that? And then I will go into some other poems. So I'm currently teaching a course that I just mentioned before we went live called Representing the Holocaust. And as part of that course, we read Primo Levi's Survival in Auschwitz. And also as part of that course, we went to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And I started thinking a lot about the shoes and the displays of shoes. And this poem came out. Shoes. There's an epigraph from Primo Levi that says, "Death begins with shoes." I don't remember a pair worth returning to. Not even the black tap slips my mother spent most of her paycheck to afford. Slick with childhood, strap always tight, leaving too much mark and taking not enough. I don't remember my clanking, uneven trod, held somewhere between ankle and gut, a tread I thought was dancing. Each step a push away from ancestry, and thud a tug back to my babas. I don't remember their shoes either, only that they never let their feet make noise, never danced, that before the tank and boot tracks, my great-grandmother ran barefoot, chasing a shock of cows and leaving too much of herself in Ukrainian black soil, the way my daughter stomps her light-up dinosaur wellies and lingers over her steps as though they belong to her. Traces their hashes like railroad tracks in sand. Her prints are gone, but our shoes, collected in glass and cased in bronze by bridges and stacked the height of countless bodies, our unremembered stand asking for return. And then I'm gonna go to a poem from my first book, The Many Names for Mother, that I wrote on my son's first birthday, which for some of you was also a memorable day. It was November 8th, 2016. So that was Election Day 2016, and we are swiftly approaching Election Day 2024. So this poem feels ever pressing. Letter to my son on his first birthday, November 8th, 2016. Remember, here you are a white man. Pearl, bone, tooth, pillowcase, linens, cotton, mouth, mourning. But only here. Know that across the water you are dark. Soil, branch, riverbed, blackbird, blood, bruise, mouth, mourning. You are otherness among others and among yours. Remember, they won't see it here at first. They'll call you by your given name. They'll hold your hand and ask to hear your history. They'll listen as generations slip from your tongue. Soiled bones and teeth and linens, mouths, a shower of stars made brighter by galaxies gone dark. They'll trust you when you say your pockets are empty. But I'll have taught you to always carry stones, to save them for graves, because you never know when you walk among the dead, because you'll know our dead are everywhere. But remember, here you are a white man, the dead under your skin, your feet, inside your mouth. They crack your white bones, milk teeth, raw gum line, still sealing soft spot. They whisper, you were never one of us, and hold you to their chest to sink you into ground. But remember, little son, you are more than stone or pearl or star or mineral, more than body or metaphor can make you or color name you or land and water divide you, more than ma or man or mine. You will know our stories in your bones, branch, Black Sea, bruised and blooming. When neighborhood boys threw stones at your mother, and words at her mother, and then hands at hers, when they threw fists at your grandfather and bullets at his, and finally shoved your great-great-grandfather so far beneath the earth, no stone or throw could reach there, you will know that none of us were white men then. Remember when half of your ancestors died, the other half did the killing. Remember, murderer and murdered are just one death apart, and your skin too is translucent, kin on its underside. Kin just one sibilance away. Remember how much this matters everywhere, how skin hurts, how no love is deep enough to forget this, and no skin thick enough to endure. So I'm going to read a poem, as you may have guessed, from some of the ones I've read. I'm originally from Ukraine, and it feels like the war and the atrocity in Ukraine are very much out of the news now, because it's as though we can only, hold on to one atrocity, like one swath of suffering at a time. And there's just so much suffering. So this is a poem I wrote 1 year after the war. Now we are more than 2 years, and it's in the form of a villanelle with these repeating refrains. 1 year later. It's easy to look away from war when your wallet's empty and sink is full, when the land and people aren't yours, when your children scream for more of you, when your body's pulled. It's easy to look away from war. The soil across the water to earth's core brims blood, but look, the sunflowers still bloom when the land and people aren't yours. So you focus on the daily chores, dig out a trench of laundry, linens, wools. It's easy to look away from war, with the dog barking, mailmen at the door. Your children speak a stranger's tongue at school. The land and people aren't yours. How does a house become a shore no news can reach? Are we that cruel? Or is it just that easy to look away from war when the land and people aren't yours? And so I'll read a couple poems from my newest book. It's a book that I call, oh, this is my least Jewish book because I only mentioned Jewishness once, but maybe that makes it my most Jewish book because it's everywhere, but I just don't say it. So it's a book where I wrote a poem for each week of pregnancy with my second child. And the poems are named after the fruit, seed, nut, vegetable that the baby's size is compared to in utero. So we're going to start with week 34, and then we're going to go back in time because to try and end on an uplifting note. This is my goal. I don't write very uplifting poems, but I'm working on it. So this is week 34, Cantaloupe. The first color they see is red, the second a deeper still. Your son asks about the blood, wants to see it rise to the surface. There are times you forget to flush. He sees traces, bites his tongue or the inside of his cheek while eating cantaloupe. Red streaks the fruit's flesh. Rock melon, skin like the moon's. He asks why his mouth fills with pennies. Copper, the shade an orange turns when mixed with blood. The taste of oxidization, too much air and rust. He asks you to kiss his tongue and inside where it hurts. Asks you to sing about hands because the other night you wept singing. А ты опять сегодня не пришла. And he was charmed, delighted even. А я так ждал, надеялся и верил by the startle of your crying. Что зазвонят опять колокола, и ты войдешь в распахнутые двери. Why are you crying, Mama? You lied, said it was a sad song, said nothing of where you are hurting, closed your eyes and sang in the womb-like dark of his bedroom about the man in love who begs the bells to ring again so the one he loves would return home and he would kiss her chapped red hands. And I will leave you with one more poem. This is week 9, Grape. And this takes us back to Ukraine, and it's, the one I'm ending with the one poem where I say Jewish, so I feel like it's an appropriate ending. Week 9, Grape. Louse, the singular form of lice. Small, wingless, you'd never heard of because you never find just one, like the note from your son's school saying, one girl has them and she's been treated and you should check every tangle of your son's curls to make sure some haven't found their way inside. And another mother says she'd buzz it all off just to be safe. Says he's a boy, so he'll look tougher anyways. And you recall how you were 3 then too, when your parents nearly shaved you, and the other kids wouldn't share the bench, would run away and yell and point and laugh, would laugh how you were infected and dirty and a louse, ruined, Jewish. So you'll refuse to cut his hair and scour each perfect ringlet, twist their multitudes around your fingers. And when you find only more locks, you'll tell him to sit with Evelyn tomorrow, to remind her she is beautiful and loved. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Julia. Allison Pitinii Davis is the author of Line Study of a Motel Clerk, published by Baobab Press, a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award and the Ohioana Book Award. Her work was supported by the Wallace Stegner Program and the Fine Arts Work Center and appears in or is forthcoming from Best American Poetry, The New Republic, and Oxford American. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Lit Youngstown, and Julia, and Phil, and Kevin. And we can't see who's watching, but my family who's watching, and anyone from Ohab Beth Shalom, which I'm an out-of-town member of. Thank you for sponsoring. So I'm from Youngstown, and I'm Jewish, so I'm going to read my Jewish Youngstown poems. And language warning if you have kids around. So I'm going to read poems from a few different projects. The first three are what I call the Neighborhood Girl poems, and it's about a group of Jewish girls from Youngstown, Ohio. Then I'll read a poem that I've been writing these language poems that play with the alphabet about Rust Belt Judaism. Then I'll end with a poem from my book. And so the poems kind of they start funny and then they get more serious. So kind of the opposite of what Julia did. All right, one. The Neighborhood Girls Tailgate in Northeast Ohio. We rubbed our ancestors' dreams with Vaseline and slipped deeper into diaspora until the amount of thigh we show seaside, those shtetl girls would have our heads. Now we find ourselves instead with all of our displacement in a strange Cleveland basement. Oh, Ohio, we have enough football shit to start a fire. We couldn't infiltrate your tailgates, so we've decided to throw our own. Hooray for wherever we are between the pale and here. X marks the spot, baby. We've touched down. Grab a beer. This next one is about the neighborhood girls getting off of work and drinking a beer in their bathtubs when a missionary knocks on their door. The epigraph is from Bereshit. And the Lord called to man, and he said to him, "Where are you?" Which is what God calls out to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden after they eat the apple and they realize they're naked. In the beginning, the neighborhood girls read Philip Roth drunk in their baths. In the beginning, we clock out and rev our Camaros until the red lights down Market Street go green. Oh, reverse ripening, we grow farther and farther from our sweet spots until back home, we fill our baths and knock, knock. Who's there? Do you have time to talk? Do you have time to talk who? Do you have time to talk about the Lord? Missionaries never get us off. In the beginning, we point to mezuzahs, lock up the doors, slide over the chains, get in our tubs, crack open some cores, and then knock, knock. In the beginning, we read Roth in the bath. His books all the same. Those who tempt you with fruit are, by the end, going to make you get nose jobs. Knock, knock. In the beginning, there's a shit ton of darkness, then light, then infinite grapes. So wine is real cheap, like Franzia, a week of its goodness, then drunk in our tubs, so suddenly struck by our bodies. We're asked like Adam, where are you? And we speak of Ohio as Roth spoke of Newark until the voice interrupts from some awful distance. And who told you that you are naked? This next one has a epigraph from Charles Goodyear, who is who the Goodyear tire factory is named after. This is from his book, 1853 book, Gum Elastica. And he writes, "It might divest the gum of its native adhesiveness throughout, which would make it better than the native gum. The Goodyear blimp flies over a line of neighborhood girls." And in this poem, every line starts with an ampersand. So the ampersands are meant to serve as both the punctuation mark, but it also looks like a line of eyes run with eyeliner going down the side of the poem, which represents the girls. So again, the Goodyear blimp flies over a line of neighborhood girls. So they form the line at the beginning of the poem. And Goodyear is headquartered a city over in Akron and gets its name from the first man to vulcanize rubber. And we do our eyeliner like Chrissy Hind in Akron, and she does it so Eva the blimp can see it. And from above, we are a line of eyes wrung and wrung with black liner. And we do not glare back like an alley of ampersands. And to be honest, we don't know much about tires and say, "Yes, Goodyear man, please fill and rotate every 6 months or 6,000 miles. And whichever comes first, we say Shehekianu and drive 75 down I-71 and end up in Akron or Kent or Ravenna. And we all intimately knew the one Jewish guy living outside of Ravenna. And what did our grandmas expect when they moved to Ohio and let loose a herd of batshit brunettes? And hey, blimp, how do we look from up here? And did our differences double our native adhesiveness and double the fun of our native gum?" So that's some of the neighborhood girl poems. And this next one is one I wrote after Roe versus Wade was overturned. So I used to belong to the Temple in Wheeling, West Virginia, which is where I live now. But then after Roe versus Wade was overturned, they were really insistent on having an event called Patriotic Shabbat, which upset me. So I stopped belonging to that temple. It's kind of a poem about what I was going through then. The first and last words of each kind of unit begin with the same letter to kind of indicate the cyclical and spiraling nature of the speaker's thoughts, but also the lack of progress made in the country and towards Jewish women within some Jewish spaces. This is kind of a long one, bear with me, thank you. It's called Radii for Set Regrets. The Rust Belt is the center of a circle. Nail an alphabet to the middle, then nice and easy, stretch it to the border, allow slack. This is a geometric situation to get a voice out of the valley, hotter than a Chevy Vega. Am I an asshole, begins the poem, because I set regrets to patriotic Shabbat, insulting the temple. Don't I know that the reversal of Roe, slavery, settler colonism continued, but stopped my temple in Wheeling, West by God, Virginia, from bestowing blessings on this fair country. Officially, the rabbi ruled that anger is ineffective and not aligning with the Jewish value of kindness. Were I patriotic then, instantly, our nation would change its opinion of me, mark the good Jew box, and restore my rights. Diasporic dialectic, to get from here to there intact, I've needed to be inflexible. I am not shouting. There is just a bad connection between West Virginia and the coasts. I gave birth 2 years ago at Wheeling Hospital. Yesterday, I called my Opgon because if I conceive again, the hospital, very Catholic, is the only hospital in town. I ask, can they save me if I'm 36, advanced maternal age? Before, I wanted a natural birth. I didn't want an epidural. I took a hypnosis class to withstand pain. Did it work for me? After the epidural, I could feel the radius of my range. I was able to return inside my body. I still realized, trust me, when to push. Should I have just gone to goddamn patriotic Shabbat? It's the only shul in a 55-mile radius. My toddler is happy there, making hum and tushin, and now that COVID isn't as bad, kissing mezuzahs. I feel bad. I even liked the hospital in the end. The way my doctor took the bris seriously when the rabbi, respecting COVID policies, recited the brachas over the phone. But to barter with the Rust Belt, saying lefty-loosey so slowly that just due to inflation things are tightening, accusations of overreacting or permit the temple its patriotism, the definitions it must doctor to survive. Rust Belt temples aren't surviving. The one I grew up at merged. The walls of the Wheeling Temple are thick with Yortzeit plaques with the names of former area temples high across the tops. How exactly they testify this isn't our temple. Their exiles crowd the bima until the circumference of outrage is orange, but packable, a pinball shattering between two buffers. There's insignificant progress while idling, but speaking, am I getting anywhere better? I've driven all night and I am still in the Rust Belt. I have davened all day and still Hashem's total silence takes one coin from me to play pinball. Please take my money. The Rust Belt is relatively affordable. And over the border in Columbus, Ohio, a friend's verdict comes back as you're not the asshole. Yet what are the precedents? Yet how else could he answer, seeing I'm the only one of me around? Halfway, I reconsider the rabbi. After all, he's pro-choice, and while busy, will prioritize golfing with Joe Manchin to sort things out. Gosh, can't I just be patient? Can't I let the can't I let the men handle this? And by this, I mean my cunt. No, I don't want to serve on any more panels about dismantling power while sitting high up at a table poets were made to compete for. It is mathematical. The angle of a head tilted up towards a flag. A pencil cup is pulled back until it breaks. It's always very difficult to compromise when compromise is violets disguised as ice cream. We can lick it till it's gone, the dilemma, till it's dripping down our chest like spurting milk. I remember the cotton I wore inside my bra, lactation hotline calls, where I just wanted a nurse to scream at me, this is what you fucking signed up for. But instead, polite encouragement. Yellow tubs of lanolin. Remember, you're not alone. The momentum of poets captured and redirected somewhere more centralized, a flag sure as sugar on the horizon. It's clear we all had art in us, but now what has become of my student who got famous then died? How can I think of his father across the country, across the flatness and the projection, 7-Elevens, arches and silver, mined out to the gray salty sea? There are people between here and there sending regrets to everything. They earmark the origin. There are witches in Berkeley who cast spells on politicians. There are women in the Rust Belt who would kill for a Coors Light. If this poem had a beer neon, it'd be right here. Here's the little chain that turns it on, and I am beneath it with my child, circling my hands toward Shabbat candles, a movement that divides evenly into the lowest common denominator of lights. I have one more, and this one is called The Jewish Cemetery at Youngstown. Last time I read there were so many people from Youngstown at the reading that they pointed out that there are a lot of Jewish cemeteries at Youngstown, which is of course true. So I'm specifically talking about the Ohab Sedek Cemetery, which maybe some of you watching have relatives buried in, like me. So this one is specifically about two people who are buried there. One is my grandfather, who opened a trucking motel. Thought I had my book here somewhere. Here it is. That my dad still runs. It's been in the family over 60 years, probably close to 70 now. And at the other end of the cemetery, Sandy Scheuer is buried, and she was one of the four killed at Kent State, and she was just like walking to class. She's related to some of my relatives. The Jewish Cemetery at Youngstown. The motel clerk is at one end of Ohab Sedek Cemetery, and Sandy Scheuer is at the other. She was shot walking to class at Kent State. His obituary headline, owned motel. I didn't know either of them. My grandma knew both. We set rocks on their icy graves, say Kaddish. In the Jewish cemetery at Newport, Longfellow asked what drove each person across the sea. After the shootings, Mr. Scheuer said, we left Germany to guarantee that our daughters could live in a country with freedom. Her grave looks like the rest. I've met her sister, and if I were her, I'd be sick of people historicizing my sister, parading her as I'm parading her, as art parades things, and for what? So I can imagine my grandparents in love. When they fought, he'd lock himself in the car, and in full view of the neighbors, she'd pound on the windshield. He'd watch her lipstick mouth rage silently on the other side of the glass. Sandy Scheuer, forgive me. Do you remember my grandmother? She's the widow standing in the cold, and nothing will shut her up above the grave, where she's still talking as if he hears her, as if the ground's an Ohio windshield, her ruby mouth scrapes to clear of snow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. Kevin Haworth is Giles Writer-in-Residence at Penn State University and the author of the Eisner-nominated Rutu Modan, War, Love, and Secrets. He has also written about comics for Literature and Belief, Jewish Film and New Media, the Simon Dubnow Institute for Jewish Studies, and other publications. He is a National Endowment for the Arts Fellow in Creative Writing and the author of 4 additional books. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks to everyone. So I have been in relationship with Israel-Palestine for most of my adult life in some personal or professional way. So I'm going to read some pieces that represent my very idiosyncratic encounters with that space. The first is from the first time that I lived on kibbutz when I was 21. It's called Moti the Garbage Man. This is the tractor. This is the wagon. I sit in the tractor. You sit back there. Everything on the kibbutz is shared, except this tractor. No one sits in this tractor but me. 30 years in this country. His Hebrew is a bleat, a scream, a flat, high, nasal American accent, a sheep speaking the language of lions. There are several letters of the alphabet he can't pronounce, but he has almost been killed in defense of this country several times. The day starts at 6:30 a.m., not 6:35. You come 5 minutes late, I leave you here. You come 1 minute late, I leave you here. It's a 5-mile walk up to the fields. His work on the kibbutz is the jobs no one else wants. He hauls furniture. He keeps a warehouse on the outskirts of the kibbutz, past the cowshed, filled with broken chairs, tables, baby cribs used by children from dozens of kibbutz families. He clicks on the radio, hands me a rag and some turpentine. Weeks go by this way as I fix the furniture and it returns to circulation in one kibbutz house or another, and we bring back the damaged goods with the tractor and wagon, filling the warehouse again. I measure the day by the angle of the sun and the change in the BBC theme music. We eat breakfast at 10. We finish at 10:30. I sit over here. You sit over there with the other Americans. In the middle of a long Thursday, he drives the tractor by his house and 2 women drinking tea in the front yard. I am sitting in the wagon hitched behind the tractor and holding down that day's old furniture with the weight of my body. Almost as an afterthought, he calls out over the grind of the engine, "That's my family." Then he gives them a wave. Moti is as big as a knobby bear, but his wife is thin and dark and beautiful. His daughter is also thin and dark and beautiful. She has a year until the army. He watches me watch her as we ride by, punches the tractor engine like a threat. His daughter qualifies for an American passport, but he won't let her have one. He says, "I don't want to give her a way out." Long ago, he wore a U.S. Army uniform and carried a rifle in Korea, where it was so cold in the mountains they burned their own truck tires to stay warm. Back then, his dog tag said Morris Bluestein. After that, he was a policeman in Detroit, then a tank commander in the Sinai. There has never been a day in his adult life when he didn't carry a gun. Even now, high up in the avocado fields, overlooking the warehouse, where we can see someone coming for miles, he has the thick bulge on his back, like an extra kidney. I ask him if there's anything about America that he misses. He answers me by giving me that Israeli cluck of the tongue, the no that's below even a no, the one that makes you feel foolish for answering the question. We're standing at the top of the fields and he's pointing toward Haifa in the distance, or maybe to the ocean. I don't know the geography well yet, and even in English, I can't see what he's seeing. Finally, he says, "You should come for dinner. My daughter will be there." From the top of the orchard, if you step out of the line of trees, you can see the entire kibbutz, the fields for vegetables and the fields for animals, the houses for Israelis and the concrete blocks for the American volunteers. To the west, the other direction, is Mount Carmel, the city of Haifa, and its sister city, Akko, the bright blue Mediterranean, and beyond that, somewhere, the world we have all left behind. Dinner is at 7, he says. Don't be late. And then finally, you know, I've never had a bad avocado. This next one is based on a idea in Jewish mysticism that the 4 holy cities of Israel correspond to the 4 basic elements, and some say to the 4 chambers of the heart. Elemental cities. Tzfat is the city of air. According to the 1906 Jewish Encyclopedia, the history of Tzfat is, quote, but a series of misfortunes. The plague of 1812 killed 4/5 of the Jewish population. 7 years later, the Egyptian general Ibrahim Pasha attacked the town and held the few remaining Jews for ransom. In 1837, a winter earthquake killed 2,200 Jewish residents, burying the bodies in their own collapsed houses. Geologists contend that this was due to the use of poor building materials. Tiberias, the city of water, sits on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, just a few miles, but several thousand feet below in altitude from the city of air. The journey from Tzfat to Tiberias slopes downhill through pine forests and can be walked or hitchhiked along paths created by the earliest Christians. Earthquakes struck the city of Tiberias in the years 30, 33, 115, 306, 363, 419, 447, 631, 1033, 1182, 1202, 1546, 1759, 1837, 1927, and 1943, cracking the sidewalks and sending dust puffing into the air. The city has been built and rebuilt dozens of times. Months after each earthquake, fishermen on the Galilee see ripples on the surface of the water. Hebron is the city of earth and burial. Moses, who never entered the land of Israel himself, designated 6 cities as places of refuge. Hebron is one of them. Accused criminals who finally reached Hebron along the long desert road received asylum from their pursuers. After accidentally causing a student's death during a classroom lesson, a beloved teacher fled to Hebron to escape punishment. All of his students followed him, and together they rebuilt the school there. The history of Hebron is the history of murder. The city was burned by the Romans, conquered by Muslims and the entire Jewish population evicted, conquered by the Crusaders and the entire Muslim population evicted, conquered by the Mamluks and the Christian population slaughtered. In 1929, an Arab riot killed 67 Jews and nearly eliminated the last of the Jewish population there. On the holiday of Purim in 1994, a man whose name means blessed shot 129 Muslim worshippers with an automatic rifle, loading and reloading several times before being beaten to death with a lead pipe. Certain rabbinic sources claim that Adam and Eve are buried in Hebron. Talmudic astronomers report the existence of 2 Jerusalems. There is a heavenly Jerusalem that hovers 18 miles directly above the original on its Judean hilltop, a satellite of stone and prayer. It is just like the earthly Jerusalem in every way, each alley and shtibloch and church and courtyard, except the heavenly Jerusalem is Jerusalem not as is, but as it can be, not in this world, but in Olam Haba, the world to come. This heavenly Jerusalem is itself a taste of the world to come. Every wrong and pettiness of the earthly city remains below, trapped by the atmosphere, replaced by acts of welcome and loving kindness. Jerusalem is fire. These next 2 are from the 21st century, happily. They're both set basically in Tel Aviv, where I taught for a number of years during the summers, and where my children would live with me. The news from Bulgaria. We will not cross paths with the bodies. We are due at Ben Gurion Airport in just a few hours, and we are deep into the final busyness of moving out of our Tel Aviv apartment. I'm carrying the luggage down the stairs, one heavy piece at a time. I return to the apartment after each trip, glad for the air conditioning. But with each piece of luggage removed, the apartment becomes emptier, less our space as it has been for the next 5 weeks, and more a generic rental apartment awaiting the next customer. Soon there will be the short, hot walk to the taxi, the nighttime ride to the airport, the intricacies of Israeli security, the final spending of shekels on gum or chocolate, and finally, hopefully, a flight moving smoothly and relentlessly along the Earth's rotation to meet the sun as it rises early Sunday morning in New York City. But one thing we know, we won't have to share the airport space with the bodies. They passed through Ben Gurion 2 nights earlier on a chartered flight from Burgas, Bulgaria, one airport giving its dead to another, the sterilized transit space at either end suddenly made very personal, if only briefly, until time passes and regular flights resume. So much of Israeli history has been written in airports. Entebbe, Vienna, Rome, Munich, in grounded hijacked airplanes and in airport lounges crackling with gunfire, in daring rescue raids and in botched rescues turned bloody and wrong. Even in Ben Gurion, our destination tonight, is itself a part of this history, though it was called simply Lod Airport almost exactly 40 years ago, when members of the Population Front for the Liberation of Palestine and the Japanese Red Army pulled assault rifles out of violin cases and fired into the crowd, murdering 26 people, most of them Christian tourists from Puerto Rico. Or the alternate Israeli history that could be written in flight numbers. Swiss Air 330, Sabina 571, TWA 480, El Al 426, El Al 253, El Al 432, like entries in a most particular and morbid travel itinerary. Now comes Burgas, a tourist town on the Black Sea, many people had never even heard of before last week, before the explosions, the bodies, the wounded. Burgas, like all the attacks before it, is now built into the Israeli encounter with airports and airplanes, an ever-evolving series of expectations and procedures, scans and questions, excitement and worry, the emotional background noise that mixes with flight announcements, the steady drone of human conversation, the unhappy babies, the stern warning, please do not leave your luggage unattended. Still, my children and I go to the airport. When we arrive, the lines are long, as they always are on a Saturday night, since Shabbat has ended and all of Israel is free to travel again. If you hadn't been reading the newspapers, there would be no sign that this week was different than any other. Soon, the small, attractive Israeli security guard is holding open my passport with its numerous entry and exit stamps from Ben Gurion and looking at the document and me at the same time. She asks, "Is this your first time in Israel?" My 6th. You don't speak any Hebrew? I do. Where did you learn? Kibbutz Ramat Yochanan, near Haifa, in Ulpan. You didn't know any before that? I learned some for my bar mitzvah. Where was that? Congregation Ezrath Israel in New York. Do you still go there? I don't live there anymore. Oh, she says, and then somewhat nonsensically, I'm sorry. I've heard all these questions before, exit and entry. I answer them fully, precisely, like filling in a crossword. I've done this enough to know that the content of the questions is not the point. She's looking for a hesitation, an inconsistency, something that will make me stand out from the hundreds of people waiting behind me. She leaves with our passports in hand and gives them to another small, attractive security guard who comes back to us. She says, "Sorry if I repeat some of the questions my colleague just asked." Then she asks all of them again, and we give the same answers again. It's all so normal. It always is. Things are normal until the terrible moment that they aren't. Even from Burgas, the eyewitness accounts reinforce the routine of air travel, how much we are able to put all of this out of our minds for the near anxieties and bothers of long lines, luggage retrieval, bad air, bad food, boredom that feels almost sacred when set against the other possibilities. We were just getting on the bus when someone came near the bus's front door and they exploded, one Israeli tourist testified. We heard a boom, and the next thing we saw were body parts scattered on the ground, a burned hole in the side of the bus. After the second round of questions, the guard folds our passports and hands them back to us. The security officers turn their eyes to the next family. Our luggage slides through the system and receives its tags. The passengers around us board their packed, noisy flights. The wheels go up. Everyone hopes to land somewhere. That was published in an anthology about air travel, and I really hope nobody read that when they were on an airplane. So this is the last one that I'm going to read. It is from the Gaza War before the current Gaza War in 2014. It is called 2 Minutes. Here are the ways in which technology can prevent you from being killed by Hamas. You can download a PDF of every public bomb shelter in Tel Aviv. As you walk down the street, note how long it takes to arrive at the next protected area. Take into consideration your age and general physical condition. You can download the Red Alert app and set your phone to ding every time a rocket is launched from Gaza. It will ding a lot. It will ding in your pocket and ding while you are naked in the shower and ding ding just as you fall asleep, finally for a nap, and ding ding even when you give up all hope for humanity and put the phone in the freezer. Ding, ding, ding. Turn off notifications when you want your heart rate to dial back toward normal. You can memorize the data supplied by Homefront Command, tracking every long-range missile, every crude rocket made in a Gaza warehouse, every blind mortar flung from one place at another, and everyone flung back the other way. Memorize the time you have to get to safety, factoring the type of projectile and distance from launch. In Tel Aviv, never be further than 2 minutes from a shelter. In Ashdod, 1 minute. In Sderot, 15 seconds. You can stare at the website titled israelhasbeenrocketfree4.com and watch the clock tick, reset when a rocket is launched. Tick, tick, reset, tick. Urge the seconds to pile into minutes and the minutes to pile into hours, but they will not. Die a little each time the clock resets. Ding, ding goes the Red Alert app in your pocket. None of this matters when you take your children to breakfast on a Monday morning in Tel Aviv. They've been at a camp in the north, away from the rockets and bomb shelters for 2 weeks. Now they are back and they want their favorite breakfast at their favorite cafe. They are saying chocolate pancakes and home fries, toast and orange juice. You hear the siren. The noise seems to fall out of the sky and it lands on your ears just as you hear, underneath and insistent, the ding-ding in your pocket. Your son, the one who is skittish when bicycles and dogs go by, jumps to his left and starts down the wrong street. You grab his wrist. You grab your daughter's wrist. You begin to run. There's a public bomb shelter in one direction and the bomb shelter in your apartment building in the other, and your first reaction is to take them home. There is no time for a second reaction. For a brief moment, you're running through the flow of Israelis heading for the public shelter, and a woman goes right by you, pulling her daughter. She yells there and points the way, but it is just a sound buried in many sounds. The apartment building is around the corner, and you have no choice now but to believe in it. The siren, still screaming, urges you to run, and you squeeze their wrists hard. This will leave a mark. You are pulling them by these wrists, thin as bird's bones, but you realize somehow that you are also holding them back. When you turn the corner, you can see the white concrete building, the glass door open. The siren is still wailing. It may or may not have been 2 minutes. You let them go. You watch them, boy on the left, girl on the right, side by side as they run. You pause because you must watch them move away from you, her ponytail bobbing as she runs, his long legs pumping like he's heading for the swings at the playground, but he is not. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Philip Terman's books include This Crazy Devotion and Our Portion, New and Selected Poems. Forthcoming in 2024 is The Whole Mishpocha, and published by Ben Yehuda Press, and This Blossoming Everything, published by Saddle Road Press. He co-curates the Jewish Poetry Reading Series, sponsored by the JCC Buffalo, and directs the Bridge Literary Arts Center in Western PA. Welcome, Philip.
Thank you, and what an honor to read here and with such wonderful poets. So thank you. I'm going to start with back on closer to home. What a powerful reading, Kevin. Thank you for that. Tormented Meshuggahs. Where are those crazy sages? The ones who dervished across the hayfields and paused to yawp a parable to the cows about the 7 beggars? That tail layered like an onion, and when you peel it, you wail like the child you still are, wounded and wonderful. And where are those rabbis who wandered all over and off this world, measuring distance between our dreams and the stars, the ones who wrote the testaments, the commentaries on the commentaries, the interpreters, the ones who exclaimed, "You haven't seen nothing yet. The world is but preparation." Those Meshuggahs. Summer harvest, we eat of the soil, basil into pesto, tomatoes into sauce, and our prayers a little table talk, a lot of laughter, and the children inhaling their supper, bodies bonkers, for they don't know what, scampering across the field to the pond, searching for koi, jellyfish, frogs, dizzy with this, elated with that. In the next world, will we be greeted with white scarf and crown? Will we be invited to share in the feast? Will we speak the language that should have been our own? Will we reach a companionable silence? Oh, you so-called masters, disclose the secrets only you know, what the worms are whispering beneath the earth you bow your bodies toward. Enter our dreams and reveal the source of our yearnings. We move from book to garden, from garden to book. Now is the time to taste the fruit before it enters the fruit, the way God consulted the book and created the world. Why look any deeper than the garment of the moment? We want to read both testaments, the love and the law, the patriarchs and the forgiveness, the silence that Buddha taught. We want the Dharma and the Java, the rebirth and the vegetable love. We're topsy-turvy for the duration, for our daughters placing small apples into the dog's mouth. See what I mean? It's like water, isn't it? It's like the dream we call our life. Well, there we go. Allison, your synagogue references reminded me of the synagogue we go to in Butler, Pennsylvania. One of those small, do we make a minion or don't we, synagogues. And it's so small, I was actually a co-president for a while. And to ask me to be a co-president is really desperate. I mean, I skipped out of Hebrew school. So, you know, there was a guy who there's always one person that holds things together, right? Like Karen Schubert does for Lit Youngstown. This is the Karen Schubert of the B'nai Abraham Butler Synagogue. It's called Bernie Could Have Been My Father. Bernie would drive all the way to Youngstown for a few pounds of corned beef and rye bread. the kind with seeds we'd consume with onion rings, and Dr. Brown's black cherry soda. He wasn't my father, but he could have been. I could have learned my bar mitzvah lesson in the back seat of his Lincoln Town car on the way to the track. I could have witnessed how he'd play the numbers between customers of L&L Glass and Paint Company in Butler, Pennsylvania, and on the Sabbath, I could have listened as he chanted the tropes of the Torah portion, tone deaf but accurate, holding the synagogue together, a synagogue himself. If a man could embody a congregation, and Bertie did, his heart so devoted to the struggling house of God, its roof dripping down during the difficult part of the service, the part where you have to stand and read silently so that only God can hear you. Bertie had that fixed too. He had a number to call out of his infinite list of numbers of plumbers and painters and general cleaners. He'd pay off the books, the unofficial mayor of Butler, his son, which I could have been, called him, because he never went anywhere he wasn't known. Even in some roadside diner in South Carolina, somebody would be at the next table who'd recognize him from somewhere, some roulette wheel in Atlantic City. Maybe he saw Bernie pass out $100 bills to each of his sons and his sons' friends, and to all his grandchildren, maybe even to strangers, because Bernie wanted everyone to have a good time. His body now lowered into the earth. He faithfully mowed and tended, surrounded by the congregation he made sure would continue. And we will continue, Bernie. You can bet on it. All right. While we're on the subject, this is my next week, April 23rd and 24th is my mother's anniversary, my mother's birthday. She celebrated on 2 days. But the 23rd was also Shakespeare's birthday, by the way, which doesn't come up in this poem. It's another poem about that. But this is My Mother Argues with Ecclesiastes. At the Wailing Wall, I'll start again. At the Wailing Wall, when she danced with the dancers, that was her time, that was her place. She ate and drank and enjoyed all the good of her labor, and now her body struggling each breath under the purple comforter, her right hand holding the white sheet, her mouth slightly open, her pale cheeks sunken, her pink gown open at the breasts, her eyes, delicate as moth wings, closed, this almost death mask, these last living moments. Is it true, as it comes to pass, that all, as it says, is emptiness, is vanity, these words, this effort, loving all, trusting few, always having something in reserve? She had one, she needed two, if she'd say, and if she had two, she needed three. The way she wouldn't trust the banks, a little of her fortune in each, or her sons, a little of her wisdom for each, not all for one, not the whole in one heart. Not the whole in one heart, in case it breaks, and you're left, she'd say, with nothing. And here I am, a good son, or trying to be, at her bedside, reading to her through her Alzheimer's and her stone deafness and her dying, from Ecclesiastes, whom she interrupts with her characteristic chutzpah. No, you schlemiel, she shouts. The day of death is not better than the day of birth. Are you a Meshuggah? She continues, embarrassing me in front of this wise preacher. The house of mourning is not greater than the house of feasting. Have you ever had children? Have you ever had the Blintzes at Corky's and Lenny's? Have you ever heard Jerry Vale sing O Sole Mio? Have you ever drunk 4 cups of wine on Passover? Eat, drink, and be merry. There, Ecclesiastes, we can agree. Yet, with this breath that came to my bones in her womb, I continue to read to her. Sorrow is better than laughter. And I know she's ready to sue him. She's asking for his name and number in this, the beginning of her ending, under the purple comforter. One generation passeth away, I continue. There is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things to come. And my mother rises to kvetch. Is this man a putz? Is he blind? Is not my son? She's pointing to me. My afterlife? Her breath is flowing now, the nurse applying delicately the morphine. Yet she continues. Can't he see? The bone of my bone, the flesh of my flesh. And so will I, in fact, carry her with me all the days of my life? And will she carry, empty of her body, the air, her sanctuary? Afternoons we would nap together, the shade drawn against the sharp light, and we'd play the game of who falls asleep first. Her assuring breath, inhaling time, exhaling chance, under the purple comforter, arguing with Ecclesiastes from beginning to end. All righty, a couple more. You all know Mawud Darwish, a wonderful Palestinian poet, and Yehuda Amichai. Let's imagine they're reading poems together in heaven. Darwish and Amichai share poems in heaven. So let's be an open hand, one of them says, offering our time to the gods. The other responds, even a fist was an open palm with 5 fingers. And it goes on like this, year after year, age after age, these two souls hovering, indistinguishable in the light, reciting their spirit selves, one after the other, no longer grieving their respective exiles, the breath of their words shaping the winds across the deserts of their homeland, which is the same homeland. And now they recite together, each listening hard to the other's language. I know and have a friend who is an incredible poet in Gaza right now. His house was recently bombed. His name is Nasser Rabbah. In fact, he had a poem in the New Yorker a couple weeks ago, amazingly enough. I have also a friend from Aleppo, Syria. He's just moved to the United Arab Emirates, thankfully, but he was in Aleppo during that small Holocaust they had. And he translates, we've known each other for 10 years, the Syrian friend, and he translates from Arabic poets into English. I help him with the English. And one of those poets was Nasser. So I looked, I'm communicating with I've been communicating with Nasser. And my Syrian friend and I have translated some of his poems, and Nasser is very happy about that and is very appreciative. And we're incredibly appreciative of him. He's a wonderful man and a wonderful poet. Also, his grandfather was a Hebrew teacher, interestingly enough, which I found out. And this is one of his poems. I want to read one of his poems, which I think can be go with any person who is in the middle of such a conflict. It's called "We Are Not Iron" in the translation. We are not iron, O God, so that we can be melted down every year. We are not copper or lead that they fire among the armies and leave behind after the end of the war as ammunition and ashes. We are not stones, O Lord, that soldiers demolish on their daughter's birthday. We were created to die, yes, but not once, not 1,000 times. We were created to have a house around us, not us around the house, searching for the remains of our flesh. Are you not the Lord of hosts, the Lord of servants, the Lord of houses, the Lord of trees? Why, Lord, in every war, are we in the wrong place? No fire to bake the roof for us, no wine to forget. We are not iron, O God, so that we could be smelted every year. But, oh God, even iron has one shine, and it has rust. Lord, tell me, what's wrong? And I'll close with one last poem. Here. And it's a true story. Because Shalom is really my middle name. So this is called Shalom is my middle name. What my mother left me with, the word we should mean when we say every other word, the word we want to be more than a word, the word I carry tucked between other words, from my birth to my death, the word embarrassed by its public display, preferring its privacy, perhaps lifting its first letter, then retreating back into the silence. But there it is, stamped on my passport, risking itself each time it passes through security, each time it wants to haul its baggage from one country to the next. Why, after all these journeys, does it suddenly step outside and assert itself, aware as it is of the separations? Why this hello, this goodbye, this salam, this peace?
Wonderful, wonderful. What a wonderful reading. Thank you all so very much. I would love to open a conversation. If I may, Julie, I was wondering if you would be willing to start us off thinking about the idea of your writing as witness.
Sure, I would love to discuss that. So I worked for about 8 years on a dissertation called Lyric Witness, Intergenerational Recollection of the Holocaust in Contemporary American Poetry. And for me, the act of bearing witness through poetry, what I termed lyric witness, has to do with calling attention to the crafted space of the poem. Because particularly when writing about, things my great-grandparents went through, things my grandparents went through, in poetry, I believe that there's a need to call attention to this generational difference, distance, and to the fact that we're in a form of art. And even when writing about what's going on in Ukraine, I am still bearing witness from such a distance. That's why I often turn to form. I often turn to, figuration, because I think even though I'm distant from the practical, the historical, even the present reality, the poems are trying to get at an emotional truth. So I think they're bearing witness to the emotional truth of the situation rather than necessarily the factual, the historical one. And that's something that I, can't escape doing. I feel like I'm just constantly driven to write about these moments of difficulty, whether they are here or across the water.
Thank you. Anyone?
That's well said. We have our internal struggles as well, obviously, and witness to those, in our daily moment-to-moment life. I know that the Carolyn Forche anthology is really wonderful and important, and many of her are in the anthology are witnesses to great catastrophes, Holocaust, wars, Vietnam War, etc. And but there's wars, all kinds of wars, and I'd like to think that witness isn't only about catastrophes, though. I'd like to think it's also about celebration. Any moment is a miracle, right? That we're alive, but also for some reason I've been attracted or drawn to, I should say, my friend in Aleppo, who was in an incredible catastrophe, obviously, and now Nasser, and they are in it. So I'm just, because I'm not in that catastrophe, I could look at the contrast of this beautiful that's happening right now outside my window, that I'm so fortunate and that I'm not in that catastrophe. I kind of need for some reason internally, not even meant intellectually, but kind of like viscerally, like, you know, focusing on Nasser, right now. I mean, he's really, I mean, this is really consuming me, that I can actually be connected, and get a Facebook message from him and send him a Facebook message and how are you? And that kind of thing. Just that, it's kind of like what Koff said. Koff said, well, even no matter how happy you are, you always have to imagine somebody behind you beating your head on the back of your head, mind you of all the break of glass, at the wedding, the breaking of the glass, which is symbolic of, okay, the most celebratory moment. We celebrate that, and it's important to it. If you don't, there's something wrong. You have to celebrate but we also have to recognize at the same time.
If I can just jump in real quick, and I love what you said about celebration and bearing witness to the self. And the term actually, poetry of witness, before Carolyn Forche's wonderful anthology, comes from Czesław Miłosz and his book, Witness of Poetry. And he says, I title this book Witness of Poetry, not because we witness it, but because it witnesses us. That poetry is this larger entity akin to faith that then bears witness, and not just to tragedy or catastrophe, but it is, an act of bearing witness to the self. So I just, really appreciate what you said, Philip.
Thanks for reminding me of that book. It really is.
I was thinking about the things that we witness in our lives, which then get refracted in some other way later in our work. For me, my first rabbi at the aforementioned congregation Ezrath Israel in Ellenville, New York, since we're all shouting out our synagogues. My rabbi, Herman Eisner, was an Auschwitz survivor. And the boys used to conspire to go to the bathroom at the same time as him, so that when he washed his hands, we could see the number on his arm. And, everything that I read is in some way a product of that original witnessing. It's just transformed and then, absorbed into my life, and then, comes out in some later work in some way that I probably can't even track. But I know that it's there. So, I think we're only seeing like one end of the funnel when we're seeing the poem of witness, or any other writing of witness. I don't know. I was just thinking about that.
Do I have to say something?
Yes,
No,
you do.
what everyone says. For me, poetry is about understanding, having access to someone else's solitude and witnessing that. And I think about Nasser's poems, and so much of contemporary witnessing on social media or the news is very different than the kind of witnessing we get in poetry. And poetry holds that space of someone's solitude, going through joy, going through grief, going through, war. And Kevin, your story about conspiring to go to the bathroom to see the rabbi's Auschwitz tattoo reminds me of my mom talking about going to like B'nai B'rith bowling Sunday morning with other Jewish women, and just like knowing them as people, and then one day noticing that they have the tattoo, and like it happened because they were they were like in their youth, what, through the Holocaust. My mom never noticed it, and then like all of a sudden you're like, oh, that kind of witnessing where it's kind of the joy and the horror all mixed together. And I think that's kind of the nuance that poetry can preserve and force us to understand in a way that so much of, I think, contemporary media eliminates that nuance, or does it demand it of us in a way that poetry demands it.
So if I can just come back to that, since you mentioned social media, I'm going to be a little bit of an Oscar the Grouch here. Moshe Ufnik is the Oscar the Grouch of Israeli Sesame Street. One of the issues with social media is I think people are reacting. They think they're witnessing, but they're just reacting. And that's not the same thing, right? What makes, witness poetry or any creative writing powerful, I think, is that time to let it sit and, emerge, right? As Julia said, through some sort of formal conception that gives it a container, that gives it meaning, right? And I feel like there is so much, of social media. One of the reasons why I am often dissatisfied with it, though I read it all the time, is because it's not, I think people think they're witnessing when they're just reacting. And those are not the same thing at all for me.
Yeah, there's a difference between the object and the subject and the object. Whereas you think about Martin Buber's I and Thou, I and Thou, you feel that, as Allison said, you feel that solitude, that connection, that human connection. That's obviously words don't do it. That's why we need the poetry, but we all know what it means. I think what it is. It's that sense of total empathy, perhaps. Empathy maybe is the best. When reading the social media, necessarily empathy, it's too much. But when poetry allows you that silence and solitude and time to really, it's all about the feelings.
And I think too, in addition to, the idea of poetry as a means for empathy and nuance, it's also a means for raising questions. And I think a lot of times people turn to sources for answers, but poetry rejects that. And it in fact invites more and more questions. And I'm taken to, when I did a 3-week fellowship around the death sites, I met a nun who moved to the monastery just outside of Auschwitz, in Oświęcim, the town in Poland. And she said, I came here for answers. And the longer I study the history, the less answers I have and the more questions. And I think that's part of poetry. That's part of witnessing too, is just continuing to ask the difficult questions, even when there are no answers.
That raises the question for me. And what is it about Jewish poetry? What is it about Jewish poetry that, something about those two words going together that really, gives me an interesting feeling. I hate the word interesting, but, it just rattles me. I mean, in a good way, like, whoa, yeah, Jewish poetry. Yeah, I like that phrase. There's something about it. Well, what is it? What is it about Jewish poetry? It just seems so eternal, some kind of God-given thing, even if you don't believe in God. Right? Some people say, well, that Philip Roth said, I don't want to be called a Jewish writer, I don't want, it that way. Back in the 50s and 60s, that's how they felt about it. But I think that's an honor to be called a Jewish poet, like King David and, whoever the Psalms and whoever wrote that wonderful book of Genesis. Yeah, sure, I'll connect. Sure, why not? I'll take it. I think there's something's better. It's a gift, like Muriel Rukey's. It's a gift, and I really appreciate it. And I thank you, Karen, for allowing us, Jewish poets, to have a little.
It's my great pleasure. I listened to an interview this afternoon with Salman Rushdie, who was saying
Oh, I
that
heard
he
that.
loves, did you hear it?
Yeah.
And the way
Yeah.
he loves the Old Testament because he loves those stories. The stories are so rich.
How could you argue with those stories? My gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that seems like a lovely place to end. And I just want to thank you all so very much for spending some time with us this evening. It's been a tremendous pleasure.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Karen.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much.